Well, if you don't concede to my demands, I will destroy the world. But my demands are $1 million.
Nice reference. It's been a very long time since I've seen those movies, so good callback.
Thank you. Welcome to the latest episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben on PokerStars.
And one of your other hosts, East Coast Sam. Welcome to our cash game episode. We're going to be talking about some of the biggest cash game shows in the history of poker television, offering our thoughts on them. Now, this isn't going to be as comprehensive as our main event stuff. Ben and I only watched a few episodes from the first season of each show, but we got to think enough of a sense of each show in order to talk about it. And if you'd like us to review any particular episodes from these shows that are later on, like in season 2 or 3, let us know in the comments and we're happy to take a look at them.
Yeah, the poker scene really is divided into two categories, the tournament scene and the cash game scene.
Right.
And again, growing up as a poker fan, it was always about the ESPN broadcasts with tournaments, the main event in particular, with occasionally the PPC, the one drop mixed in there here and there. But really, as a fan of television poker, I didn't really get too deep into watching the various cash game television shows. Really, the big two on TV originally was High Stakes Poker and Poker After Dark. High Stakes Poker was found on GSN, the Game Show Network, and Poker After Dark began on NBC. And these shows kind of fit into that late night television, you're up late, just scrolling the channels, oh, poker, I'll watch it, not like a weekly primetime television show. And as a result, there's a little bit less pressure on these episodes to be like super compelling, like you gotta see this television. But ironically, the first seasons of a lot of these shows had some pretty big momentous fights and hands, so that was definitely fortunate. But this is not a category of television that I am really approaching from a nostalgic point of view. A lot of this was brand new to me.
Same here. Yeah. I mean, I remember watching some clips on YouTube back when I was sort of getting back into poker when I was a teenager that had a lot of these hands in it. And again, we're going to be talking about a lot of big moments here. Just kind of luck of the draw that it just so happened that a lot of these big moments fell during the episodes we were watching. But yeah, I mean, I'm really approaching this as a newcomer. I mean, I prefer playing tournaments over playing cash games. I find playing cash games honestly a little boring. So I always sort of gravitated more toward watching tournaments. But it was definitely an interesting change of pace, especially because not only was this during the poker room, this was also during the golden age of reality television, where, if you just put on a random channel, there'd be a reality television show of some kind. So they're clearly playing up the personalities of these guys. Each shows a different approach to that, but, it's more personality focused, table talk focused than other shows we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and, the attention grabbing nature of television means that for the most part, the casting for these programs are kind of the classic, mid 2000s top pros poker scene.
Right.
So that's your Negreanu, your Texas Dollies, your Phil Hellmuth, Barry Greenstein. That sort of era of poker are really who were most prevalent in these programs. And all these television shows lasted a number of seasons. A few of them were actually revived by Poker Go. And so they still exist in a slightly different form today. But on this episode, we're discussing really the 4 shows in particular: High Stakes Poker, Poker After Dark, the Big Game, the Pokerstars Big Game, and Poker Night in America. Mm-hmm. Each one is covering poker. Poker After Dark does do tournaments and sit and goes and cash games, but all of them at some point have cash games to it, and they all handle things a little bit different with some of the rules. The stakes obviously are different for each show, and each one definitely has its pros and cons. I do have in my head kind of a hierarchy of my favorite to least favorite, but we'll discuss that once we cover the whole roster of shows. And I think to begin, we need to start with really I'm not sure if it was chronologically the first show, but it was one of the first shows. It was High Stakes Poker. Mm-hmm. AJ Benza and Gabe Kaplan as hosts. Gabe Kaplan, who we talked about a little bit in our one drop special.
Right.
And this is a cash game that blinds $300 and $600 in kind of this odd sort of poker room of couches in the background. The buy-ins ranging from $100K to up to $1 million. And we get actually a pretty good variety pack of players at this table. It's not just 9 pros. Mm-hmm. The funny thing about watching just pros at the table is that they're kind of just swapping on money over and over again. You know,
Right.
their lifestyles aren't going to change from one hand going one way versus the other. And no doubt these guys have, played each other in past cash games and
Oh yeah.
before and after these episodes. And so, on that level, it kind of takes away some of the drama or the stakes from watching these hands, because really it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things versus say in the main event some amateur from Kentucky, Nebraska, playing in his first big tournament, winning $8 million. Obviously, is a life-changing situation. So we don't have that angle to approach the show with. But anyway, tell me your thoughts on any thoughts you have on high-stakes poker to start off with.
Yeah. So again, this was during, golden age of just low budget reality television. It is a very low budget show. The room just looks very weird. Like they're trying to make it seem like, oh, they're in like an exclusive hotel room playing poker, but it's just like, it just looks cheap. AJ Benza and Gabe Kaplan are the commentators, as we mentioned. They're standing in front of a green screen at like the start of each episode, and it's clearly a green screen effect. But anyway, putting aside the production stuff, I mean, yeah, this is a fairly decent show. I mean, obviously, as season one, they have some kinks that they got to work out in terms of getting the players to talk and the commentators and all that. But we have a really great lineup of really interesting people. The two amateurs, or, you could say that they're amateurs, but they both had some experience in the past, would be this guy, Nanzeri, who has an entire segment dedicated to his, like, you call a poker swag room or something, which is like he spends this entire time saying how he like wants to dress in a certain way to create this image for himself, and you can't go wearing a suit and tie, which is funny seeing Dario and all the others dressed in suits and ties and win millions of dollars. But anyway, like there's another guy named Jerry Buss, I think is his name, who's
Rest in peace, Jerry Buss, the former Lakers owner.
Former Lakers owner. Yeah. So it's, they're not super, super personable people, but it is interesting to sort of see their interactions with the other players at the table. And yeah, I mean, you got Negreanu, you've got Jennifer Harmon, you've got Greenstein, you've got really just a great lineup of players who not only have different table presence, but also different styles of play. So you can really see how they all interact with each other, which is nice.
Well, it was kind of nice to have two amateur, rich, not average Joes, but
right, yeah.
non-poker pros. Kind of like how you had a mixture of businessmen in the one drop. Kind of that mentality, sort of us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
And then with a few, top pros. Also Ted Forrest, Daniel Alahi. Again, you said, Greenstein, Harmon, Doyle Brunson. So they're all in there. Negreanu kind of takes this bizarre table persona where he buys in for the maximum $1 million, has these 50K cash bricks that he kind of dramatically will throw in to the table to symbolize an all-in, because that's pretty much usually going to have the player covered. And he plays some really aggressive, like bizarre poker that, like we've talked about in the past in the mid 2000 main events, how odd the bet sizing, cost 10,000 on bet 50,000. We kind of get some more of that in a cash game form here, as we see some pretty messed up, way overbetting the pot sized all-ins by Negreanu. He has $1 million at the table. Obviously, he's not betting $1 million when other players have, maybe 150,000.
Right.
But he'll bet like all in on a 25K pot for 5 or 6x of it. And from the commentary, because Kaplan and Benza kind of take a bit more of a hands-on approach with the commentary as far as talking about what a player should do,
mm-hmm.
what would be the best move, or what they should be doing in response to their opponent's bet or something. And they don't really call Negreanu out for any sort of ludicrous bet sizing, so it kind of gives the implicit sort of approval of that move to a degree, because they're not like condoning that such a bizarre bet sizing. And so again, this is Negreanu who, if you watch him in main event or his vlogs, you don't really see him play that style. I mean, obviously this is
right.
Not a tournament, but it's just really weird seeing him in this sort of kind of gameplay style.
Yeah, I mean, this first episode is just the Daniel Negreanu show. I mean, he's just pushing everybody around with 3-deuce suited and all sorts of different hands. There are, some moments where, some players manage to play other pots beside Negreanu. But yeah, I mean, this is just from start to finish, it's the Negreanu show. And it is sort of interesting to be like, that he's the table presence, he's the table captain. Maybe he just sort of said to himself, here's the first episode of this new show. I'm going to do something a little different to try and be on television or whatever. But yeah, it is definitely interesting to see him play around like that.
And I think I actually appreciate how High Stakes Poker did have a couple of interesting, I call them bits, side interviews or sequences, including Negreanu at the Gamers Ball, showing off his poker game, which I think was on the PSP or the PS2.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. I'm a gamer, so obviously it's kind of fun seeing that moment in history being shown in this. This is a 16-year-old episode of television.
Right.
It's kind of fun to see Negreanu get into the scene. They played like a sit and go tournament with this kid beating Negreanu, and when they played the video game like multiplayer, that's a pretty fun little bit there. I thought that was kind of cool.
That was funny. Yeah, that was a good moment.
And so again, it's a decent episode. I mean, they got through a good number of hands. I mean, the action's kind of aimless. There's not a ton of like tangible something happens. Like there's no moments in poker history that happen in this episode.
Right.
Nobody goes from, rolling big and, Molly's game that, what's his name is, and then like goes broke and like, it's on the street with no money. But again, it's an amusing enough start to trying out this show. Unfortunately, episode 2, if you ask me, is a little bit weaker.
Yep, same there. I'm with you.
Again, you have kind of ups and downs in the quality of the drama. They have the same players at this table in these first 2 episodes.
Right.
Ted Forrest actually gets himself unstuck after being down significantly in the first episode. But really, besides that, the only real hand that stood out to me was Doyle Brunson going all in for $500,000 with pocket aces pre-flop in a 4-bet of all things, and getting Barry Greenstein to bite with 2 queens pre-flop. That was a decently impressive hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's right at the end of the episode, so it has a good sense of finality to it. But yeah, I mean, I agree. There's nothing super interesting. It is interesting to see Ted Forrest, explaining his strategy and how he's all about reading players. And he plays a lot of different hands, manages to catch a lot of cards, kings, ace, queen, etc. So, he went on a bit of a heater here, especially because Ted Forrest isn't really a name who's, around anymore. So it's kind of nice to hear him talk about what it was like back then. But yeah, nothing super interesting here in terms of the play. I mean, a lot of good table talk here and there, but nothing too special.
I mean, so the funny thing is, you definitely get a good sense of 2006 poker.
Yeah.
There's one hand where Gabe Kaplan says Jen Harmon should overbet the pot to get a flush draw to fold, which is a little strange because you kind of want a flush draw to call you if you're not giving them a good price. Like if you're, the pot's 25,000 and you're going to bet 15,000. Then that's if you're gonna bet like 5,000, then you're just, there's no point. You're just to hit the the implied odds there. So I would never overbet the pot to get a flush out of fold. I want to get them to call if your hand is protected enough, if you have a block or if you have a set versus top pair, whatever. Again, it's kind of a silly play. You're almost trying to minimize how much you can win by taking that approach. That's just kind of my poker analysis of that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Episode 3, though, is kind of mixes things up because, again, this is kind of cameras are around this table and they're just playing all day long. So naturally, players aren't going to sit there for the whole day. They have to, other things, or they're only going to be there for so long. So some players leave and some new players come in. So Alai, Forrest, Doyle, Nasseri, they all step away and we get new players, Elio Lesra, Shaun Chikan, Todd Brunson, so I guess only one Brunson at the table at time allowed, and Sam Farha, our favorite 03 main event runner-up. And so, again, some new blood definitely livens things up after a, pretty mediocre at best episode 2, especially since, we have some pretty talky players taking the place of 3 or 4 of the, quieter players at the table previously. So that definitely worked for me as far as mixing things up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sam Farha is just, we've talked about him before. It's just such a naturally charismatic guy. He has this just great table image. And so, yeah, I mean, he just steals the show. I mean, anytime you have Sam Farha at a table, he's just chatting with other people, really trying to, subtly get under people's skin. Shiki too as well. Not as super combative as we will see later on, but here, still mixing it up with some people. It was definitely a good change of pace to have these guys in the hands.
Yeah, and we even see a little bit of sort of the poor poker etiquette at work of Negreanu, where he actually
Right.
talks during a hand to Todd Brunson's discontent when he's like, "Why are you talking in the middle of? Why are you talking during a hand that you're not in?" It's a good point, and Negreanu, considering how much of a etiquette poker, politics Nazi he can be sometimes, and it's amusing seeing kind of a bit more of a naive younger Negreanu being a little bit out of line slightly.
Yeah, nothing too bad. I mean, again, we'll talk about some etiquette breaches later on, but yeah, I mean, it was definitely interesting.
And then episode 4 again keeps this table together, and there's a bit more blood as far as wins, losses for particularly Negreanu.
Hmm.
The first ever run it twice of this show, which would be again that's one of the things that separates cash game poker from tournament poker is running it twice,
Right.
straddles, side bets at the table. Oh, if you do this, you'll get, 7 deuce game, things like that. A bit more loosey goosey with the rules. As long as the table agrees to it, then there's not some, tournament director over their shoulder saying you can't do this, you can't do that. So that, again, adds to the fun factor for the players and usually for us too. It's kind of fun to have alternate stuff. Running it twice though, I don't know. I'm kind of not a fan as a poker viewer
Hmm.
because if they both take one half, it's like, well, the hand really means nothing. I mean, chop pots can be fun sometimes. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that's more when they have the exact same hand and they're trying to outthink each other with the same weapons. When they run it, if they run a hand 6 times and they each take 3 times, it's just kind of dull. You know what I mean? So it's just not my favorite.
I mean, yeah, I can see that. I mean, again, in my opinion, the player's enjoyment trumps the viewer's enjoyment. I mean, if in that case, running it twice, if you're a disadvantage, it's to your advantage to run it twice to try to win a pot. So, in my opinion, I don't really care either way, especially when, something exciting happens when you say, I don't know, run it 4 times. I don't know. But
Yeah, I know. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, Negreanu, it would be a future sort of pattern of him, getting unlucky on high
Right.
stakes poker, and this is kind of the phase one of that timeline where he gets unlucky against Sam Farha, big shocker, loses $60,000 after having top pair and losing both runs to
Right.
Ezra in his second time. So again, Negreanu, he came in with a lot of money, so he can afford a splash run. I guess he was up a little bit, but as a whole, I guess I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead or jumping around here, but to summarize our experience watching the show, there were a couple of issues I had with high stakes poker though. Number one, I cannot stand when Gabe Kaplan says, "Oh, and Negreanu takes down a $75,000 pot" when he bet like 60,000 on the river into 15K. It's not a
Yeah.
75K pot when it's the chunk of that is from a bet that went uncalled. Like it just does not work that way.
I'm with you. Yeah.
You could at least just say how much they profited from that hand. Like he wins $15,000 in that hand.
Hmm.
You wouldn't say it's just a silly sort of thing to announce like that.
Hmm. That's fair enough. Yeah.
Also, it would be nice to have known how long each episode spanned. Like, was this an hour of play? Was this 2 hours?
Hmm.
How long they've been sitting there for? And I guess my third grievous, and you tell me if you agree. It's kind of annoying to not know how much every player is up or down
Yeah. Yes.
overall. I mean, it just seems like it's just kind of aimless, and so it hurts our understanding of the narrative of how well someone's playing or how unlucky they're playing. Like, Negreanu loses big here, but we don't know exactly how much he's lost overall.
Yeah, I'm with you. They should have a graphic on the screen that says how much, or just a line from a commentator would have been nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, the show, this is season 1. It's a low budget show, so there were some kinks that they had to work out. And I haven't seen too much of the show after this point. I've seen some clips with Jamie Gold and all that, and I definitely do feel like as time goes on, the lighting changes, the clarity of the camera changes. Gabe and the commentators become a little bit more personable. They weren't too cringy, they weren't too invasive or anything, which was, I thought, fine. Yeah, I mean, but I do feel like I have a good initial sense and say that, some, just naturally, like some episodes are going to be less entertaining than other episodes because of what happens, because of who's at the table. But on the whole, like this would be something, yeah, like if I saw these first 4 episodes back in 2006, I would definitely feel the encouragement to keep watching.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't think the commentary is particularly great, but it did
Yeah.
feel like they're trying to talk to the common man not trying to be the Nick Schulman, Ali Najad of 2022, where they're a bit more particular about how they are describing the action and what they would do in that situation. So again, poker is a very different game 16 years ago. So
Right.
that could be influencing my overall outlook on that component of the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we should be looking at this as it stands now, but also I think a little bit about how it would have been back then. Like back then in 06, like I think this is satisfying commentary. And yeah, like as time goes on, the game's gotten more complicated and commentary has changed. But I also think commentary should be about entertainment as much as informing the viewer. And I found this, again, not super entertaining, but satisfactory.
Mm-hmm. And there is a decent amount of table talk to keep things active, even if some of the hands are a little forgettable here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But then we move on to Poker After Dark. Again, probably as close a format to high stakes poker in some respects, but in this case, the very first season of this show, every season they would break down each sort of individual game into a week of episodes. So it could be broadcasting episodes once a night for 5 nights straight for one particular sit and go, or for one cash game. Then the next week would be something else for the whole season. So as opposed to say a weekly episode broadcast schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that lends itself good to like the late night, flipping the channels, half asleep, eating chips on the couch, whatever. It's a bit more less invasive on your brain. The commentary is considerable, or the narration, I guess, by Ali Najad is considerably lessened compared to even Gabe Kaplan on High Stakes Poker. And they do a 6-max structure for this first game called Poker Brat Attack. A $20,000 buy-in, winner takes all, chips and cash at the table. Kind of a strange idea. And each episode would cover a couple levels here and there. And they just, for the most part, just kind of let them play. They don't really. There's no bits. The only real hosting component is of Shaun Hyatt, who's kind of on this peripheral on these outer couches, again, kind of like high stakes poker. There's other people sitting not involved in the game at all, watching, and it's kind of a relaxed atmosphere too. Although I think the high stakes poker set did feel a bit more relaxing of an atmosphere to me than the After Dark.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting approach to have such little commentary. The commentary really amounts to summarizing what happened in a hand, or what hand a player has, or they have a flush or a straight or whatever. And it's really just focused on table talk. I mean, an entire minute or two passes before you hear from the commentator again. And Shaun Hyatt, really just sort of says at the end of the episode, that's it for the day. Tune in tomorrow, or does little interviews with the players. The interviews aren't super substantial. Or also sometimes a player will just get up from the table and walk over to Shaun Hyatt and be like, I think he has this in a hand, here's what my read is, which I actually thought worked, as it kind of gets, sometimes can be boring hearing, with players tanking, thinking about a decision. So it gives something for the audience to listen to. But yeah, I mean, I do really like this format, that it's more like a sit and go than a cash game, and it's winner take all. And again, just a great batch of players. We have Gus Hansen, we have Phil Hellmuth, Steve Zolotow, Huck Seed, Annie Duke, and then Shaun Chikan, which, just a great group of 6 players, again, each with different styles, each with different table presence, going at it.
Yeah, it's definitely a great table. I actually think that this table almost has too much table talk. It's kind of the idea where when you're studying for a history class, a textbook, and you highlight the whole page instead of just the important bits. When there's so much table talk, it almost doesn't work sometimes. Like you just kind of want them to to catch their breath and not talk the entire time through a hand. Like there's literally there are hands where there's zero break in the table talk at all. And that bugs me a little bit, actually. And ironically, Phil Hellmuth is the center of a lot of the table talk. And I actually think that once he gets knocked out, spoiler, there's not enough table talk after he gets knocked out. So it's a weird kind of grass is greener situation where sometimes we say we hate how little table talk there is, and then we finally get possibly the most table talk filled table of all time, and it kind of almost doesn't work for me at a certain level.
Yeah, I mean, they're all friends with each other outside of the show. So they're talking about like just all sorts of things, like stories from back in the day, bets over Annie Duke's marriage, which is very strange.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't mind the players being colloquial and being, friendly to each other. But yeah, I do agree that it can be a little bit too much.
And so this, as a sit and go, they all have 20,000 chips. The blinds begin at 100, 200, so 100 big blinds each. Blinds go up pretty regularly. And we got pretty regular chip counts
Right.
featured. So we, a couple times an episode. So we're never left guessing who's in first, who's, falling behind Hellmuth. And Hellmuth is definitely the center of a lot of the action. He kind of gets into it with Shaun Chikan quite a bit. They just had this pre-existing beef, or Chikan was just really sticking it to Phil with his comments. And again, that was enjoyable to a certain extent. And Hellmuth is very active in the action. Doesn't play particularly well from the final results, and nonetheless, there's a couple of pretty good Hellmuth quotes here. Actually, episode 2, the very first hand, Hellmuth versus with the dirty diaper, the 3-2, and gives a great line to the camera. Yes, America. I know this is the third time you three bet me on. Third time you bet me on Third Street. It's just a pretty good line there, and because of the blind structure being so slow, we don't actually get our first all in until episode 2, and even then, it's not even called. So it was again the actual dynamics of the table, poker wise and chip wise, isn't particularly dynamic for the first couple episodes. It's just more about the table talk at that point for me. That's that I'm drawn to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Phil has that presence, which I'll just leave open ended because some people like it, some people don't like it. But in this case, everyone's sort of picking on him. I mean, it's a little mean. I mean, that's what Shaun does. Shaun kind of picks on people, but like everyone else kind of gangs up on Phil a little bit. And it's funny for sure, but it also is a little awkward because it's just like he's just being signaled out here.
Yeah. And the biggest problem with this sit and go is, as a sit and go, you're going to have a lot of forgettable hands, a lot of raise and takes, a lot of button raise, big blind calls, check folds the flop. A lot of forgettable hands are mixed in there. But again, because we talked about it before in 2016 with Christopher Keating, when they're talking and they want to show that in the episode, they have to best show the hand that was occurring at the same time as table talk. So that means a lot of the hands are pretty forgettable. There's really not a ton of super memorable hands from a poker standpoint as far as big bluffs or big coolers. None of that really happens. And again, it's a bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. It's from it's only $20,000 to buy in, winner take all. There's no amateurs. There's no, stories before the tournament coming into play. So that's, not obviously on the agenda for this kind of program. Really, the highlight for this entire quartet of episodes that we covered here was the first hand of episode 3. Pretty much everything from that first hand, from when Hellmuth busts from the table, is by far the best content of high stakes poker and poker after dark that we watched, I think, if you ask me.
Yep, Hellmuth raises with ace-10. Duke raises over him with kings. And then Hellmuth kind of sits there for a while. He'd been the short stack. Things hadn't really been going his way. As I mentioned, everybody had been ganging up on him. So he's trying to, think through a decision what to do here. He thinks Duke's trapping him with something. And everyone else at the table's talking. So he's asking, can you guys please stop talking so I can think? But then he keeps talking. So Steve Zolotow, of all people, needles him and says, please be quiet so I can talk, making fun of him.
Wasn't that Huckseed? That was Huckseed.
I think that was Zolotow, yeah.
I think it was Huckseed, and then Zolotow was kind of on Hellmuth's side a little bit. He was trying to calm the fires down at the table and stuff. And Hellmuth, takes offense, starts running at the tournament director, yelling at Chikan. Even though Chikan really wasn't too out of line in that particular hand. And then one of my favorite lines of Hellmuth probably of all time: "I'm not upset. I might sound upset, but I'm not." When he's like yelling at everybody, and then he starts trying to pull I'm not going to play another one of these if that's going to be the ruling. When he's like, well, you can just take as long as you want, and eventually you'll have enough time to think it over, right? And Hellmuth gets so angry, he ends up folding, and he actually gets dealt. He leaves the table for a little bit before coming back later. But when he comes back, he's talking to Shauna, in the middle after the card's been dealt, and so the table is upset that he's still in the game because the blinds are on a time structure, not a hand
Right.
structure. So they don't want the blinds to artificially be increased because they're losing 3 minutes. Shaun lets him have an interview, and we kind of have a stop the clock gate where Duke is trying to say, Phil, you can talk as long as we know that there's stopping the clock. And yeah, it's a pretty fair situation. I mean, it's a relaxed atmosphere. This is not life changing money, so I understand the latitude of an interview. It's for TV, so let it happen. But then the table starts getting even crazier. How many compares it to the WWF?
Right.
And just as Chikan just bangs the table randomly, the timing is unbelievable because that's again in my head that connects the dots so well.
Right.
And Hellmuth, I hope this all makes the show, which it does, because it's just an absolutely bonkers situation that Hellmuth finds himself in, and he's kind of the straight man in this sort of comedic routine going on here, and it really works for me as comedy.
Well, Ben, you say that Shaun wasn't out of line in that hand. He called Hellmuth an idiot and made fun of his reading abilities and all that.
No, before that, like when Hellmuth turns and looks right at him when he's conflating the entire table just only to Chikan. He's not yelling at Hansen. He's not scolding Seed. He's only really personally scolding Chikan. Aaron Duke was dead silent the entire hand. She knows she's not the best card, so she wants to not give anything away. And really, Chikan takes the brunt of that anger from Hellmuth, even if he says he's not angry.
I mean, he makes fun of Hellmuth talking about his reading abilities, and then Shaun laughs at him, and Shaun just yells at him and is like, "Oh, you're just taking TV time. Muck your hand, idiot." I mean, it's so mean. It's just so mean.
Now, so the downside to this pretty hilariously enjoyable sequence is that it makes the rest of the episode pretty boring afterwards because Hellmuth busts. The gameplay is just not very good. I mean, they get so short so quickly. The blinds go from 400 to 800 right to 600, 1200. So they get so short so quickly that it doesn't leave a whole lot of room to make any moves. The more short stacked, number of big blinds on the table, it goes down so quickly that really it hampers any fun, any sort of creativity. And as that leads into episode 4, this is where the eliminations are starting to come out very quickly. Zolotow, Aaron Duke, and Chikan all bust back to back to back. And it was just a pretty dull and raisin take poker sort of style for a lot of that episode too.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of episode 3, the final, 6 hands are either walks or raisin takes it. I mean, it's just, and then episode 4, we get the third hand, we have, a 3-bet raise, but then it just goes right back to shoving and folding around. I mean, it's just, they really should be cutting this out of the show, I think, filling the extra time with, maybe a segment, an interview segment or something. I mean, I just don't need to see this.
I mean, this was a sit and go. I mean, you can imagine we've had World Series Poker final tables shown in entirely one episode. Now, a sit and go is not quite a final table per se, but it's the same idea of a table playing onto a winner. And you can imagine 5 episodes going into a single 6-max tournament. It's just, there's not enough, average to above average poker to really justify that amount of screen time for this event. And I guess that's one of the advantages that cash games have, in that you don't have, for the most part, the number of chips and money or dollars at the table is staying consistent. So the action can escalate at a consistent flow from episode to episode, whereas here the blinds really change the whole nature of the gameplay, and in this case for the worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, Poker After Dark does not only do sit and goes. They do cash games. They do I guess it's sit and goes and cash games really, but they would mix up pros, amateurs, a little bit of both, to keep things fresh. Obviously with our sit and go, you're going to have the same players the whole time. So you could probably watch through a whole season and find maybe your favorite block of episodes. In this case, again, it's a very unbalanced in quality sort of a sit and go. I think obviously Hellmuth is a big part of why it's entertaining, but then the structure of the sit and go really kind of wears down my enjoyment level as it continues.
Yeah, I mean, the clip of Hellmuth freaking out at Chikan at the start of episode 3, you can find that on YouTube. I mean, it is definitely interesting to see how players change their styles for these episodes. Gus Hansen, who's normally a very aggressive player, actually spends a lot of time on fairly passive play, folding a lot of hands, not really making these big raises, but he actually makes it to the final 2. So it goes to show, him changing his style was interesting there. But yeah, I mean, you can watch the hands with the big talking online and kind of just skip the rest.
From a structural standpoint, I preferred high stakes poker over After Dark.
Mm-hmm.
I think, obviously it's all about who's at the table, I think, for the subjective preference versus the objective preference.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if I watched, 40 episodes of both shows, I might like After Dark more, but
Yeah.
it's a very limited sample size. I think I preferred high stakes poker a little bit more. It's relatively close for me, but I think HSP a little bit better in this case.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's a good read on it.
And then we move on to our third example of cash game television, the Pokerstars Big Game.
Mm-hmm.
And this completely different,
right?
Even though it's still no limit Texas Hold'em, 6 players, but of far more variable formats, different, and for me, a much improved type of show, especially for average poker Joe like me. You kind of can with the structure. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but here we go. So this tournament was not tournament. This show was a 6 max cash game with 5 poker pros or businessmen or whoever, and then 1 loose cannon. The loose cannon won this qualifying Pokerstars tournament and was $100,000 at the cash game, and they would play 150 hands if they survived, and they would take any profit that they won from those hands.
Yeah, and it was also, you mentioned that it's a no limit hold'em thing, but yet oddly enough, pre-flop, it's pot limit instead of no limit. I guess to try to prevent players from going all in and having it be like a shove and take situation. But it is, yeah, I mean, it's the table we have for this is the loose cannon, this man named Wiggins, also known as DC or Junebug, a man of many different names.
Or E-Dub. Or
E-Dubs, that's true. And then we have Daniel Negreanu, Phil Hellmuth, Tony G, and Phil Locke, who, sort of interesting dynamic, sort of a lot of talkative players, a lot of big personalities sort of clashing with each other, but, not, people play with each other before, but again, not super diverse in terms, I think, of their playing styles. A couple of, they do tweak their games as time goes on, but it's kind of interesting to see these players coming together. And yeah, I mean, it's 150 hands is the maximum, and then the loose cannon gets to keep whatever they, profited from their 100K stack. And then how the show works is that there's a bunch of loose cannons each week, and whoever makes the most money gets an additional prize, a EPT passport, which is worth, I think, $50,000 plus whatever money they want. Right. So it is kind of, there's a competitive angle there to encourage the loose cannons to try to make as much money as possible, not just make a profit, but try to earn extra. So it adds a little bit more tension to the show.
Yeah, the blinds were 200 and 400 with a 600 big blind ante. So like $100 from everyone at the table. So again, this is kind of the origin of the big blind ante that we would see in the main event nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And again, pot limit, pre-flop. The episodes would be broadcast 1 a day for 5 days in a row. So you have like a week, kind of like Poker After Dark would do. So each episode covers more or less 30 hands, not exactly, not a big deal. And they would show, okay, and then each episode they would say, oh, we'll see you tomorrow. Or last night, how did you think things went? They were kind of talking at the table as if each day of the each episode was a day, and then the next day they come back. When really they just put all the hands back to back to back. Amanda Letterman, the future wife of Negreanu, is the host, and the commentators are Chris Rose and a much more controlled, less goofy Chris Stapleton. Or Joe Stapleton.
Thank God. Oh my God.
Joe Stapleton.
Before we don't like Staples, but here, yeah, he was tolerable.
He's definitely more constrained here, and with again loose cannon E-Dub Wiggins, he gets a little bit of a bio over the course of the week, and again, much like After Dark, we get regular chip counts, or rather the loss or win scores shown. So how much a player is down, how much they're up, because again, it's very relevant for the loose cannons to know how they're doing in relation to how many hands you're left or into their most recent loose cannon. Now the loose cannon, if they turn a profit, they could agree to come back the next week to try and increase their winnings, which would only be done once in the entirety of the first season. This show only lasted 2 seasons due to Black Friday and the ending of the North American Poker Tour, but season 2 would get rid of the chance for the loose cannon to come back the next week. So little format change here and there. And again, if a player busted or wanted to rebuy, they could rebuy for as much as up to $500,000.
Yep.
And the initial buy-in was between 100K and 1 million. But for the most part, in this episode, in this Wiggins story arc, most players didn't buy in for much more than 100,000, just to kind of start things off, because these players might be playing more than once in that season of the big game, so they didn't want to put all their money into one basket to start off with.
Right, even though Texas Dolly doesn't really get much going and actually has to rebuy in order to replenish his gone stack. But yeah, we also, in terms of the set is essentially this like very well lit, artificial looking room. Like it's not trying to seem like a hotel room or a private room where players are. Like this is clearly a television set. And Amanda Leatherman is sitting sort of off to the side in these chairs. And sometimes you see a player sort of sitting with her, or sometimes somebody walks over or she walks over, kind of an odd approach to the set that they're not trying to even pretend like it's a back room somewhere. But I think it's fine, no big deal.
Yeah, again, pretty similar to After Dark in that respect, where a player could go over there and talk to Amanda. And I should say that the dynamic of having a loose cannon at the table against these 5 pros that are going to try to take advantage and get that, almost free money of sorts, it makes for an entirely different game.
Absolutely.
Even compared to, say, Nasseri and Buse in high stakes poker, where they were kind of picked on a little bit. This kind of meant more because there's more pressure on the loose cannons to actually play back at them. Right. So I think if you watch any of these on YouTube, you'll see the comments so often ripping apart the loose cannons being too tight, making a bad fold, not doing the right thing. And again, loose cannon, it's hard to kind of put yourself in that spot. Just when you're actually up money, you're playing with your actual money at that point. So it's kind of hard to think, $1,000 is, I'm going to call a pre-flop raise with ace check of $1,000. That's $1,000 to some, average Joe like Wiggins. That's a big deal versus, these other guys that can splash around. It was pretty common in the game player for pros, just kind of call up only 2 cards pre-flop because, it's pot limit. I'll just call it. I can see a flop for relatively cheap, and if I win, great. If I don't hit the flop, I'll just bluff them. So they kind of had a here we go sort of mentality there, and it makes for some pretty good. The loose cannon part of this show is very solid, but then the real spotlight here is the Tony G show, especially at the expense of Phil Hellmuth.
Yeah, Tony G and Phil Hellmuth are sitting next to each other. So Tony G is just needling Phil the entire time. And yeah, I mean, the table dynamic is really interesting because, Locke, who's normally like a fairly talkative guy, is actually fairly laid back throughout this. Doyle Brunson, also not super, super chatty, but he's also a little bit sort of withdrawn. So really the big sort of dynamics in the table are between Tony G and Phil Hellmuth, and also between Negreanu and Wiggins, because Negreanu and Wiggins are sitting next to each other. And clearly Negreanu is trying to like butter Wiggins up, like try to kind of just set him up for the spike so he can take money off of him. It's really interesting to see. And I don't know if Wiggins picks up on it or if he just doesn't care, but they're just talking back and forth at each other, and Wiggins is giving information, which is just interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. And with Wiggins, he definitely kind of has some amateur ways of his game where he'll, when Negreanu reaches for some chips, he'll go like, "Oh, come on, man, really?" Like it's just super weak when he does that, and it's never as a deceptive disguise sort of play. So that that kind of hurts me inside right here whenever I see that. Really, the Hellmuth Tony G show really gets going after Tony G felt Doyle Brunson's original 100K buy-in.
Right.
And, he went all in dark on the turn, And really, the conversation after that hand takes place where Hellmuth like, I would have busted you. At least he didn't have aces, right? He rubs Hellmuth's shoulder. So funny. And then Hellmuth says, I would have busted you. And then G's response is, I would have busted you. You feel good. I love it. And just, G cannot lose in conversation against Phil. Either Phil Hellmuth, he talks over Phil, or he just he laughs off whatever Phil says. It's just really good stuff by Tony G.
Yeah, I mean, he's just such a great needler. I mean, just him bragging at how he's going to say, I'm going to clean you all out. You better have a lot of rebuys. He's just so awesome.
Hope you got lots of rebuys. Very quotable. And Wiggins is a fun character too. He's kind of got some pizzazz to his table persona, his nicknames, and just kind of being he plays scared, but he doesn't talk scared.
Yeah.
So he's not a shy person. He's kind of poker shy, which is a different story. And very regularly we see the profit loss graphics, which is always good to know because again, with 150 hands, you want to have a sense of, okay, well, he's doing pretty good, but he's running out of hands to do really, really good. So that's good. And at the end of the episode, we see 3 players are up and 3 players are down on money. So it's nice because then that impacts your interpretation of the next episode because, they were down, but now they're doing pretty good. And you can keep mental track of sort of each act of the cash game.
Yeah, something else that we didn't mention was how much straddling there was, and that there was a lot of conversation that Phil wasn't really willing to straddle, so they're all trying to kind of egg on Phil to straddle. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of hands, especially in episode 2, where players are straddling, and it really just does affect the dynamics of how the hands unfold.
Mm-hmm. Daniel really tries to pick on Wiggins as much as possible. He has direct position on Wiggins, and so when Wiggins is big blind and Negreanu is straddling, you might see Wiggins limping. Wiggins did a lot of limping.
Yeah.
Which, again, is not a great move when you're probably folding to a lot of the re-race over the tops, which is what Negreanu pretty much does with any 2 cards the entire 150 hands. So you would have thought maybe he would have just raised it up or did something differently to prevent that from happening over and over again. But again, Wiggins will get his way in a little bit. But I didn't think that episode 2 was quite as good as episode 1.
Yeah.
As was the case on High Stakes Poker, oddly enough. I guess, when they sit down first, they sit on the table, they've got the most energy. And then as players get annoyed or something, they have a little bit less talk to get the action more exciting. But really, again, much like Poker After Dark, episode 3 has the new best content of this entire cash games run of episodes here, where we get the infamous, the viral, the unforgettable Wiggins of 2 kings in a multi-way pot. Flop comes out 10-9-9. Hellmuth was the last raiser pre-flop. He makes a continuation bet with ace-9 with 3 nines top kicker with 50 ace. Wiggins makes a min raise plus 2,000, folds around to Phil. Hellmuth pondering, and then he gets accused of, which I don't agree with, slow rolling as he decides to go all in. Wiggins with a great line though before Hellmuth does that. If I ace or kings, I've been man now, wouldn't I? Which really I disagree actually, but Hellmuth puts in for 74,000, which is how much Wiggins had total of his original 100,000, after putting in about 10 or 12,000 pre-flop. And you took it from there, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, just the whole buildup is just so good. Wiggins is clearly very, very confident with kings. He does this very unusual bet where he's like rolling with his head and neck like this and then puts in the raise. It's just great. But yeah, they first off agree to run it 3 times after Wiggins goes all in. And then Hellmuth is accused of slow rolling so many times that for whatever reason, they modify it to 4 times. First run comes out, Hellmuth wins it. Second time, Wiggins wins it. And then there's an interesting moment where he sits back down after the hand goes, oh, I thought we were running it twice, and then stands back up.
4 times, I thought it was only twice. I'm going to sit back down. I'm going to stand back up.
Yeah, and then the third time they run it, Wiggins wins it. And just the look on Hellmuth's face after it happens is just so good. He's so disgusted. And then the 4th run, it's about to happen, and Wiggins is standing up, and he's kind of like, standing there waiting for it. And it cuts back to Hellmuth, and he's fallen into his seat. I can't replicate it. It's just like he looks like he's about to throw up or something. And Wiggins wins the 4th time. So he wins 3 out of 4. Hellmuth is clearly disgusted. Everybody is celebrating. Doyle's happy. Phil's happy. Like, just everybody's so happy. And it leads to the immortal line from Daniel Negreanu: "Why is everybody so happy except Phil?" And Phil's just disgusted at the edge of the table. It's
Tony
so
G
good.
is saying how much terrible. He's a disgrace to the game. How can we do that with ace 9? You know, I'm calling you a freaking. What are you doing? And again, Hellmuth was the 85% favorite when the first run was being run out. And,
Right.
And so they calculate that the chance of that happening was 0.18%. So Hellmuth only wins 1 out of 4. And no, there was a little bit of money besides Wiggins and Hellmuth in the pot pre-flop. So it wasn't like quartered, but he lost, probably about 30, like probably about 70% of the the money that he put in there. And so Hellmuth gives a great line to Wiggins when he walks over to Chikan, saying, "Yeah, I really like you." As Negreanu responds whenever he hears that. And then Hellmuth, as he's trying to defend himself to Tony G, says, "No, these people, they," and then Negreanu says, "What part did they again?" to Phil Lock, because Hellmuth just conflates Negreanu, a top player, to being a part of they.
Right.
Again, one of his Hellmuthisms. So again, Hellmuth, basically from run 3 onwards, his face is just comedic gold. He just put some screensavers of that, and that's just the best thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite Tony G line is just this very, very little line. Is blink and you'll miss it. So Phil goes, "Tony, can you please just shut up?" And it doesn't cut to Tony G, but at that moment he says, "It's black time." Just very subtle. It's just so, there's just so many wonderful moments.
One of the Tony G isms is the bike/trike. Like, you bring the trike. He can't ride a bike. You're a disgrace to the game.
You're a disgrace.
Now, Hellmuth obviously losing a bunch of money here. Tony G loses a monster cooler to Negreanu a couple hands later with a straight against a full house on the river. And then Hellmuth gets bluffed by Tony G, who has a combo draw on the turn. They rabbit hunt the river. Tony G says, "I would have missed." The whole table laughs. And then Tony G does the "you're a disgrace to the game." And then Hellmuth goes in with the "I wish I weren't a bad loser, but it's way worse to be a bad winner. And you're a bad winner." And you kind of almost agree with Hellmuth, but when he's a bad loser in the way he's a bad loser, it kind of nullifies his point a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's a tough call. I mean, I don't know.
Yes. So again, it's a lot of fun with Tony G and Hellmuth in this episode. Wiggins ends the episode actually up $64,000, which again, a considerable sum of money at this point. But I think the most important point I want to take from this episode is that we actually, for the first time ever, we have reviewed hundreds of poker shows. We finally learned what the equation for the aggression factor is.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it after we had seen in 2010 main event the numbers of like aggression factor and all that jazz. I finally know what aggression factor means.
I don't, but
it was in the episode. You forgot already?
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, one thing we forgot to mention is how many times they show sort of graphics of aggression factors, how many times players are raising pre-flop, stuff like that, which again kind of helps flesh out who each of these characters are and what their playing styles are like. And it doesn't take too much time on the episode. It gives a nice break from the episode.
And another really nice feature from this show is the behind the poker face, where one or two poker players discuss their mentality during a hand that just showed as far as each part of the action, pre-flop, post-flop, turn, river. We learn every step of the way. And that's kind of fun because it's a very fresh hand for them, so they can really capture their mindset of the table dynamic at the time.
Yeah.
They picked one hand in episode 2 to do this, but it'd be pretty a regular feature in the big game. And I appreciate it more than, say, the best hand I ever played in the main event or championship moments. This is a better iteration of that sort of segment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then episode 4, again, no bust outs here. Everyone's staying at this table. It's probably third best of the 4. This episode, it's nothing special. Wiggins getting bullied. A few small pots here and there. Not all of them are super memorable, but Again, some action there. Tony G really starts to get into the tilt juice though, as he just cannot hit a single draw, flush draw, straight draw, pair draw, any draw. You just can't seem to hit anything, and his bluffs keep getting called or shown down at showdown with the worst hand. So even with all the good vibes he was getting with
Right.
versus beating Hellmuth, he still was down a considerable sum at the table.
Yeah, and there was some good table talk in this episode, like Phil Hellmuth forgetting his own mantra, which I just thought was hilarious. And it's Amanda, of all people, who manages to get the third part of the mantra right, which is moment. And it's kind of funny that, ironically, Phil is forgetting to be in the moment while he's so tilted after the Wiggins hand. It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, these blocks episodes are in 5, and we really only watched the first 4 of each show to kind of cover a little bit of everything. But the end result of this first week was that Wiggins won a little over $50,000. So he was pretty much folding his way from that win against Hellmuth down to his profit when the 150 hands ended. But he would ultimately decide to not return the next week and just hang on to the money. His goal was, to EDUB to double up to 200,000, but he got a little over halfway there. And I commend him for that decision, because I really got the sense that he, besides that one hand against Hellmuth that he won, he 3-quartered him. He really did play very well. He won a couple of small pots, so he kind of like overplayed big hands to kind of guarantee a small win. And really, so his style was not a good match for this table as far as, accumulating lots of profit.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, if I had $50,000, I would walk away with it. So I mean,
especially since it's not like as if you paid 10,000 to enter tournament and then won 15,000 back. This was all, there was no risk in a sense for him. So 50K free money basically. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're not trying to criticize him too much. I mean, he brought a lot of personality, props him for trying to hold his own and sort of the table talk. But yeah, I mean, if I were him, I would, after I won that big pot, I would sort of just fold my way down.
And so, analyzing the big game overall, I think it's a very fun format, a lot of action. There's a few forgettable hands in the edit here and there, but for the most part, they're still pretty good considering the lineup of players we had at the table. Stapleton, less focused on comedy at this point, more on just, analyzing the action. I would say that the narration is a bit less intrusive than high stakes poker, but obviously more present than After Dark.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think rides the right balance there. Even if Rose and Stapleton are kind of generic in a lot of respects, they don't really leave an imprint like Norman Chad does.
Yeah.
Even though we kind of don't like him, the later era of Stapleton definitely leaves more of a, impression on you than this version of him right here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind when it comes to commentators. I'd like a little bit of perspective on how the players are doing. A lot of their commentary is about Wiggins essentially saying that he needs to not limp so often and expressing joy whenever he doesn't limp. But yeah, I mean, I don't really mind the commentary. I don't really mind the presentation style. I mean, as with the other 2 shows, it really is about the table dynamics, about the players, Tony G, needling Phil, and all that. But it's good that we do get a sense of who each of these guys are personally, which is.
And again, the structure is a very unique structure, having a loose cannon that can kind of make or break the whole table because it changes the whole way the table plays back at him. So it's kind of a mini audience surrogate at the table, where obviously you're not playing, but you can you're probably an amateur watching this show and you're putting yourself in the loose cannon shoes, thinking about what you might or might not have done in that spot. So again, it adds a novelty factor to that show, where the other shows were just kind of your basic, it's poker. There's no extra level to the action. Yeah, so again, I like this show. It's my favorite of the ones we've discussed so far.
Yep.
But then we kind of get to this odd show called Poker Night in America. Unlike the other shows we discussed, this is only half an hour long of a show. And again, this would often be aired in entire blocks of television late night on some obscure, sportsy sort of network, obscure, like high hundreds in the cable listing. And it is a cash game, but for considerably lower stakes than a show like a high stakes poker or After Dark. The blinds being 25 and 50 in this start of season 1. And which does mean that you get a few more of the less top pros in there, a few more, not quite casual players, but players are willing to, put in a 5 or 10,000 into the table to be a part of this program. And unfortunately, season 1 is really only watchable on YouTube in these just the hand versions,
Right.
which cuts, and ironically, that cuts down a half-hour show to about 12 minutes. So I'm kind of confused because I'd watched some of these shows before our rewatch, and I don't recall there being like 10 minutes of filler. So it was kind of a strange uh, weeding down the action. Uh,
Yeah.
so again, I mean, it is what it is. And again, as a half-hour television show is an entirely different beast than a 1 hour show because really
Right.
one episode of PNIA, it can kind of fly by with no real impact, like real quick. Like I didn't watch these at 2x speed actually. I watched them at like 1.75x because
Mhm.
it was just flying by so fast that it just didn't leave any lasting impression on me.
Yeah, the graphics on the screen are very cluttered. They have all of the players sort of at the bottom of the screen and shows you that they've folded, but they don't necessarily show you what hands they've folded. And it's still like the graphic is still there even as the hand is going on, which I think makes a very cluttered experience. The commentary isn't that great. I mean, it kind of just tells you what the hand is, what's going on. This player said this thing, and they try to do these like little jokes and stuff too along the way. Like at one point, Shaun Deeb mentioned he doesn't know who Robert Varconi is, and so they like flash a Varconi photo on
Yeah,
the screen.
almost like pop-up graphics almost
Yeah,
of like a little bit on somebody mentioned in conversation at the table. And again, if people that have watched more recent seasons of Poker Night in America will know that they have changed the graphics from being at the bottom of the screen to the side of the screen, like they
right.
well, at least not covering the whole bottom row of the screen. The actual table, we get a couple of people we recognize, Mike Matusow, Shaun Deeb, rest in peace, Gavin Smith, Matt Glantz, Christy Arnett, Greg Mueller, Tom Schneider, who we know way back from the late 2000s in the main events.
Mhm.
Again, the blinds being 25 and 50 with a $100 straddle, although I guess they could straddle more than 100 if they wanted to. A little strange there. And again, the action, it feels a bit more real and live, like a raw sort of live, like camera in the corner, just playing like closed circuit television than the other shows, which is kind of cool. But I don't know, the action. So the first 2 episodes are kind of merged into one video on YouTube. So it was kind of weird to watch in the back to back. They just kind of fly in. Um, there's a few players getting some money in the pot, but really nothing nothing too memorable for me. Nothing like no S or A tier moments.
Yeah, absolutely no real big moments. I mean, nothing really in terms of table talk either. They just kind of keep talking all throughout the hand. There's a lot of people in the room as well. There's players at other tables. Darvin Moon might just walk over and be like, "Oh, it's Darvin Moon. Here he is, everybody." So it kind of just makes a very sort of noisy, cluttered atmosphere to watch the show. And yeah, I mean, just nothing super interesting. Nothing, no crazy bluffs or anything like that. Hands just kind of play themselves.
I will say that from an education standpoint, you do get a better sense of the raise sizes with cash games.
Yeah.
Raise pre-flop, 90% pot bet on the flop, stuff like that that I saw a lot when I played a cash game last year. So that was true to form, but again, because the stakes are even lower than high stakes poker, there's really no drama as far as, oh, he lost $3,000 in that hand. Like that money means very little to these players. They're just there kind of for the fun of it, not for the. I mean, they want to win money, obviously, but it's not going to make or break their day, their evening, their night if they lose a little bit here and there because it's not life-changing money.
Right. Exactly.
Darvin Moon, oddly enough, pops in around the table earlier, so it's kind of sad to see both Darvin and Gavin in the same episode since they both since passed away. A couple other players pop in episodes 3 and 4, like Michael Dentale. But I mean, besides a conversation about twerking, I really have very few notes about any of these hands, with the exception of 2 hands in episode 4 of this season 1 of Poker Night in America.
Yeah, same here. I mean,
episode 4 has a pretty busy, a $29,000 pot with aces and queens going in pre-flop, which again is pretty big of a pot considering the blinds are 25 and 50.
Right.
I think if you compare that to high stakes poker where the blinds were 300 and 600, that's 12 times the blind, so 29,000 times 12 would be close to $600,000 in the pot. So again, a pretty sizable pot relative to the blinds. But I think really the only highlight really for this entire collection of episodes is the Shaun, Deeb, Mike Matusow slow roll hand.
Yeah, Matusow raises with jacks to 400. Deeb calls with pocket fives. The flop comes up 5-5 brick. So it's below Matusow's jacks. So he's all set pretty much. Matusow makes it 1K. Deeb calls. Matusow then shoves, and then Deeb stalls, really for no reason. I mean, it wasn't like Matusow had been needling Deeb before. We hadn't seen them in a hand before. Nothing like that. This really just comes out of nowhere, and Deeb does obviously make the call, smiling as he does it. And Matusow he's just, the rage is just emanating from him, and it's a quiet rage until he finally just screams that he's going to punch Deeb in the mouth. It's just so crazy.
The funny thing is, I kind of got the sense that Matusow would be the only player Deeb would ever slow roll, but Matusow would be the only one never get upset about it. So he kind of had it backwards. I feel like if he slow rolls anybody else, they laugh it off. But because it's Matusow, he's the only one who would take it personally. That's why he did it against him. That was sort of psychoanalysis of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where it comes from. I mean, it is funny, but it's just so mean too, and it's just ugly.
Yeah, and so again, I think the takeaway from Poker Night in America is it really just comes down to, do you have just really memorable hands? Because table talk, again, it's kind of like in watching the Goonies, the first after the Goonies. They're all talking over each other. Nothing really stands out as far as the talk, and much like Poker After Dark, when there's too much table talk, it just kind of means nothing.
Exactly.
Whereas in the big game, there was plenty of talk, but it was usually referring to the action in that moment of the hand that just transpired. And obviously, Hellmuth and Tony G and Negreanu to a lesser extent are going to always be fun to listen to talk. So without those characters here in Poker Night in America, again, not quite as interesting. And again, it's probably my least favorite of these 4 shows. Again, the later seasons do work much better. I've not watched them religiously, but I've watched a little bit here and there. And definitely, the first season of a show like this is definitely going to have some bugs to work out. And also, this was just hands. There was no filler or whatever else they were cutting out. But again, there's no narrative flow to the action, whereas the big game has some narrative to it. It's not a tournament, but it kind of has a Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really just does feel like they set some cameras up and filmed these guys and didn't really think about narrative or commentary or humor or anything like that, which is fine if you want more raw poker, if you're interested in sort of learning more about the game and studying how hands unfold. But it just doesn't make for very interesting television, even if you then take the 30-minute episode and cut it down to just a few minutes. Couple interesting moments in terms of the table talk, but nothing really you can latch onto. I haven't seen the other episodes of Poker Night in America. I wouldn't be inclined to check it out off of what I've just seen.
Mm-hmm. So if you were going to rank these 4 shows from your least favorite to favorite, how would you list them?
I think it would go Poker Night in America would be my least favorite. Poker After Dark, then High Stakes Poker, then Big Game.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same camp there. I think that, again, a part of cash game television is that you have to have those viral, memorable, funny hands in there. Right. If you don't, the action kind of becomes sort of homogenous. It just kind of blends together, doesn't really reach any crescendo. If you YouTube search any of these shows, you're going to find the best of the best hands, and you won't really find the middling hands in any collection at all. You'll just find each season probably has maybe 5 or 6 big hands where running it twice, a huge pot, someone gets angry or something, or the Jamie Gold, Sam Farha show or something like that. But if you don't have that in the episode you're watching, it's just so easy to tune out, especially if it's like 2 a.m., you're at home and the action's not really drawing your attention to the television screen. I could just imagine someone just not having any sort of emotional response to an episode of poker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fairly straightforward stuff, all 4 of these shows. Each of them has their moments. But yeah, I mean, you really have to have an episode that is very well concentrated, very well edited, because otherwise you're just watching a lot of raise and take hits, and that's just not interesting.
Mhm. So in conclusion here, I definitely prefer tournament poker television. I think the
Yeah.
cash game has its place in, poker diehard, audiences, attention span. But for me, I like the big game. I've watched the big game on YouTube fair amount. I think the majority of the 2 seasons that are available on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other shows I really don't have the desire to go back and watch from episode 1 all the way to the end of the most recent season. It's just not that kind of show for me.
Yeah, same here.
Granted, if somebody I knew personally was in the show, different story. But
Right.
Watching 6 pros swap around the same money over and over again, and then they go home and then do it again the next day. I mean, the world's not changed from that. When you watch the main event final table, you have 9 millionaires made, 9 lives are changed.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the heart of watching poker is for me.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah, so that concludes, I think, our look back on some of the best and worst of cash game television. I hope you guys enjoyed, listening to us here. If you have your own thoughts on favorite episodes, favorite moments, or parts where you totally thought we were dead wrong, happy to hear it. As far as what we want to talk about next, I think we have to discuss that. But again, always open to suggestions. If you've been in any of these shows and you want to talk about your experience with us, that'd be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the main event wrapped up last time we concluded. The final table was just starting. I don't have too much to share about it. I mean, a couple interesting things like Matusow starting the final table, most in chips and going out in 9th, but it wasn't like Philip Hilton at all. I mean, he just got unlucky in a bunch of spots. The Edinburgh tank, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ben, but I think it was a little ridiculous.
When your head's up, you aren't really doing anything wrong tanking unless your opponent calls the clock on you or gets angry at you. It was 2 long tanks. It was not tanking every single hand like a Christoph Vogelsang against Dan Smith, where
right.
Eventually Dan Smith spoke up. And again, when you have the best hands, I don't really think you mind waiting a little bit.
Yeah.
When they're tanking, because either they fold and or they're trying to find a way to call, and you want that. And the more they squirm in them, the more energy they're wasting, the better situation it is for yourself too. So I was okay with it. I thought it was kind of funny. I didn't get a chance to watch the heads up live, so I knew the second tank would be ultimately the wrong decision. But the first one, I was very curious what was going to happen after that tank. So it worked for me as far as an entertainment value. But unfortunately, I kind of feel like it was a pretty forgettable roster of final table. I didn't know any of these players. I'm not going to remember Jorstad's name, anytime soon. I mean, obviously I remember it now, but it just wasn't a winner that I really had any connection to. He was not in the footage up until that point when I was watching, day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that was a shame. And obviously, all my horses that I was rooting for in the race on day 7 were already out before the final table was began with 10 players. So that was not particularly emotional for me as far as having one person to really focus in on and root for. But again, I'm confident that the next main event next year will be the biggest of all time. That's my expectation.
Yeah, I mean, they came very close this year, so I definitely expect them to make it next year. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. The final table, I managed to watch the final 3 live. And, I feel like Jorstad outplayed Attenborough. I mean, he got lucky in a number of spots. I mean, he hit a boat on his last hand with Queen Deuce of all hands. Good for him. I'm happy for him to have won. It is funny that the 2 times we've had $10 million main event winners, both of them are from Northern Europe. That's kind of funny. Hats off to him. But he's not a super exciting winner. Wasn't a super exciting personality, even though I did think it was funny how he bowed to his rail after the hands were turned over. But yeah, props to him for winning. Just wasn't a super exciting final table. And, overall, I think the main event was, a fairly decent one. Had some interesting players. It was good to see a bunch of players, make it all the way to that penultimate day. It's just a shame that we couldn't get at least one horse at the final table.
Yeah, again, I'm also be very excited for next year's main events. I'm pretty happy overall with the choices made in the production of these last two main events. I kind of
Yeah.
walked into as far as the post-COVID Poker Go main event world. I guess the Worlds of Poker Europe is upcoming relatively soon, and we can probably discuss some of that footage as we get to there, and that will be interesting. I'm wondering, we could discuss the Worlds of Poker Europe at some point too. I mean, we haven't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not probably haven't talked about that could be one option. Again, listeners, let us know if you maybe want to hear about the Worlds of Poker Europe, or if there's other poker content on Poker Go, or just anything in the poker universe that you want us to talk about. We might talk about poker movies at some point in the future too. So we got a lot of options. The world's our oyster.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to talk about poker vlogs. We're happy to talk about other poker podcasts, poker movies, poker TV shows, whatever. We'd love to hear any suggestions you have in the comments, or if there's any episodes of the shows that we just reviewed today that you'd like us to go and watch. We're happy to take a look at those. Yeah, I mean, the poker world is a lot broader than most people give it credit for. So we're happy to watch whatever.
Yeah. But until next time, guys, I want you to enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care.